October 20th, 2013. Why is this day significant? It's simple because today is the first of the final BCS rankings. What do I mean by that? This is the first BCS rankings of 2013, but the final one because most of you know that we have a plus one starting next season. A lot of us are excited about that. I'm kind of excited about it. I like the idea of a plus one. I've been hoping for a plus one for several years now. Does that fix the problem? No, not at all. A lot of you think it does, but let's be honest. If you think that it's a problem now about who gets into the national championship, what kind of problems do you think there's gonna that are gonna pop up once you have, one undefeated team, two teams with one losses, and then four teams with two losses? Which of those final two loss teams gets in? Only one of them can get in. Can you imagine if that was this year? Let's just take Stanford for instance. Okay, let's just go by this year. Let's say Stanford. They end the season ranked in the top 10 with two losses. One loss to Utah, of course, and then they lose on November 7th to Oregon. Now, I'm not saying they're going to lose to Oregon. As a matter of fact, talk to me on the 6th because as it stands right now, I don't see any reason to change my mind that Oregon's going to probably lose to Stanford. Am I guaranteeing it? No, not at all. I just know Oregon. Oregon is Virginia Tech. Oregon is Boise State. It's they're one of those teams that you know they're going to falter at some point, probably late in the year, and it's going to cost them a chance at the national championship. That's Oregon. You know, it is what it is. So let's just say Stanford loses to Oregon. Let's just say, and let's just say Clemson works its way back into the top 10 after last night's debacle to Florida State, and they lose the final game of the season to South Carolina. You're going to have a lot of people saying, well, Clemson probably deserves a shot at that, at that 14 playoff more than Stanford. If Florida State's in the top two or top three, that's right there. You can say, well, hey, Clemson lost to a top three team. That was one of their losses, and they lost to South Carolina, their rival. What's Stanford's excuse for losing to Utah? Now, Utah's usually got a tough defense. Utah reminds me a lot of Wisconsin. You can always look at Wisconsin to be tough in the trenches. I think Utah can be very tough in the trenches. That's gonna be that represents a problem for Stanford. So if you look at the final teams, Florida State, Alabama, let's just say Oregon. Two of those teams right there present a huge, huge problem for Stanford. Florida State and Alabama. Alabama, they're successful every year because they get after the quarterback. They shut down the run. Look what happened to Notre Dame last year. Notre Dame last year, supposedly, they had everything going for them to finally take down, the king of the mountain, Alabama. Yeah, well, you saw how far that got you. It's like the beginning of the season. Everybody thought, hey, Alabama, they're in for a tough one against Michigan. No, they weren't. Of course they weren't. My best friend's a diehard Notre Dame fan. This guy's a psycho Notre Dame guy. He felt confident going into the national championship, but then he said the one thing that nobody really took into consideration. You can't give Nick Saban a month to prepare for a game and expect to go in there and win. Nick Saban's too damn good of a coach with way too good of a team. Very deep, everywhere. They got depth everywhere. They got speed everywhere. You know, giving Nick Saban a month to prepare for that, that's just dirty pool. He had how many months to prepare for Michigan? You knew that game was going to turn out that way. So right then and there, that represents a problem for Stanford. You know, they're not going to be able to run the ball successfully against Alabama like they do against Washington State or USC or whatnot. That's not going to happen. They're going to have to throw the ball. They're going to have to take their chances with that secondary. That secondary that plays a lot of zone because they got speed everywhere. Remember like USC was 5, 6 years ago. They could just sit there in the zone the entire. They could sit there in the zone the entire time. If they really wanted to mix things up, they throw in a zone blitz. They had speed everywhere. That's Alabama. That's what Alabama is. When LSU was a tough team, when they're a top-ranked team, they've got speed everywhere. Auburn, they've got speed everywhere when they're at the top. Right now, everyone loves Florida State. It's everyone except the pollsters loves Florida State. What's great about Florida State? They got speed everywhere. Did any of you watch that game last night? Lamarcus Joyner is not the biggest guy in the world. But my God, is he fast. And his speed killed Taj Boyd. Taj Boyd. Everyone looks at Taj Boyd and they see this guy who's possibly the next RG3. They think Taj Boyd could possibly go first, be the first quarterback drafted this coming NFL draft. Did you see what Lamarcus Joyner did to him last night? It was insane. You go ahead and you put Stanford in the top four right now. And if there was that 14 playoff with the +1, I call it Stanford's first one eliminated. And people are going to say, well, I should have put Clemson in there. Well, it's hard to say you can put Clemson in there. I mean, after what happened last night, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But if you think for a second that the playoff system is going to change everything next year, you're seriously out of your mind. Well, it's like I said earlier, today the initial BCS rankings come out. And I think it's pretty safe to say it's going to probably follow what already the AP rankings have. Alabama, they're going to go first. They're going to be ranked number one. Rightfully so. You go and you look at the comment section on every sports page out there, and you're going to have your idiots. Alabama, they're weak. They're overrated. Did you see that one play? A.J. McCarron, he's boring. Yeah, he's not a sexy quarterback. There's nothing sexy about A.J. McCarron. He's basically, I don't even know if he's Danny Werfel. He's not even Gino Torretta. But the guy wins. He wins. He, he's on the best team in the nation. Rarely makes mistakes. Puts the ball where he needs to. He reads defense as well. I mean, the guy's a winner. Alabama, they're the number one team in the nation. Until somebody beats them, they're number one. And when they get beat, chances are everyone behind them will get beat too, and they'll still end up in the national championship, just like last year. They're the number one team. The number two team, well, here's where you have the problem. Oregon. The AP has Oregon. 3 first place votes. They have them ahead of Florida State. Florida State got 2 first place votes. A lot of people out there look at that and say, well, hey, Oregon, do you see Oregon? They got speed everywhere. Marcus Mariota, he's a stud. The guy's phenomenal. I'm going to tell you what I tell everybody every year. Oregon's got great speed for the Pac-12. I almost said Pac-10. They got speed for the Pac-12. They do. They look incredible against the Pac-12. They look good against a team like Tennessee. That's the SEC team that they beat, Tennessee. Against California, they look great. Against Colorado, they looked awesome. Washington, not so much, but they pulled it out. Washington State, they started off, making it a little too close than they should have. But they pulled it out. But the question is, who have they played this year? Okay, they open up against Nicholls State. And let's be honest, they put a hurting on Nicholls State. Hey, Nicholls State couldn't get in the end zone against them. But yet that doesn't impress me. They played Virginia. I got news for you. A 2-5 Virginia didn't fare much better than Nicholls State. That's the ACC win they have is against Virginia. I got news for you. When they scheduled Virginia, Virginia was not a thriving team. There was no upside. They knew what they were doing when they scheduled Virginia. It's not like they scheduled Florida State. It's not like they scheduled Miami. Not like they scheduled Clemson. Scheduled Virginia. They wouldn't have scheduled Virginia. They'd have scheduled Boston College. Maybe North Carolina. You know, they're not going to schedule Virginia Tech. So they go after Tennessee. Yeah, when they scheduled Tennessee, Tennessee was going through their issues. You know, it's not like they're in a hurry to go after a huge SEC team. You don't see them putting South Carolina. You don't see them putting Alabama. LSU. No, they don't need to. They're Oregon. They're the darlings of the pollsters. They're a Pac-12 team, just like the Big Ten. The pollsters are gonna fight to make sure the top Big Ten teams and the top Pac-12 teams are in the mix as much as they can allow them to be in the mix. If Oregon wins out, they can play Nicholls State every other week. They're still going to be ranked in the top 5. They're going to be right there. They're going to be right there for a shot at the national championship. But let's be honest, it's Oregon. At one point, they're going to lose to Nicholls State. It is what it is. This is the one thing that gets me. Another one of my closest friends, this guy, he's a diehard Pac-12 homer. He loves the Big Ten. He despises everything in the Southeast. And since for the last, what was it, 8 years, 7 years that the SEC's had the national championship, that's only made his angst towards the Southeast stronger. He's going to sit there and fight for Oregon like he's doing right now. He's going to fight for Oregon. Oregon deserves to be in the top. Oregon, look at them. Look at the speed. They're just incredible. They can go up against Alabama any day of the week. Yeah, but they can't beat Alabama. They can't do it. I don't even know if they can beat Florida State. I haven't seen them play anybody. I'm looking at their schedule. Washington is their toughest, is the best team they played. And Washington played them tough. They did. They're a 4-3 team. And they honestly they gave it wasn't I mean it was close for an Oregon game. It really was. Washington they're a solid team. Oregon went into halftime with a 2 touchdown lead. You know, third quarter, Washington came right back at them. But Oregon knew how to finish. Don't get me wrong, Oregon is good. Are they a top 5 team? Absolutely. Do they deserve to be number 2? No, they don't. A lot of people are going to look at that and they're going to say, well, okay, Florida State's big wins. Pittsburgh, Nevada, Bethune-Cookman. They struggled against Boston College, and yeah, they did. They struggled against Boston College. You started wondering if that was going to be that one game they were going to give away, like they do every year. I think what you're looking at in number 2 and number 3 is you're talking about trust right now. I think that's where the voters are coming from. It's an issue of trust. They trust Oregon to win out more than they trust Florida State. Florida State is always has the talent on the field. The question is their coaching. Jimbo, Jimbo last year. If you remember last year, they had that knockdown drag out with Clemson where they came out victorious and they were right there in the national championship mix. Was it the following week they went to Southern Florida, South Florida, and they just it was people just said, God, they look horrible. It must be a hangover from last week, and that could have been. They left everything on the field that night in Tallahassee. They left it all there against Clemson. Then they traveled to South Florida, and man, they made South Florida look a lot tougher than they were. And then came the inevitable the week after that. They gave one away to North Carolina State. You looked at that and you're like, Jimbo, what in the world are you doing? I mean, I've never seen a more conservative batch of play calling against a team that you didn't really need to be conservative against. Was North Carolina State good? Yeah, they're ACC good. But Florida State made them look nationally, world class good. And after they lost that game, it was just, they kind of, that was it for them. Their fate was sealed. And it was like, well, let's just see if we can stutter our way to an ACC championship, which they did. You know, Florida State doesn't have the trust of the pollsters. Doesn't have the trust of the fans. Last night may be different though, and this is the difference right now. This is what I gotta. I wonder where the pollsters are coming from because this is I think honestly a legitimate question. Before last night, Oregon's their biggest win was against Washington. They did really well. Well, Florida State took on a ranked Maryland team. Was Maryland the caliber of Washington? I don't know. Probably not. But they're ranked. They were ranked, and Florida State shut them out. Their defense shut them out while their offense was busy putting 63 points on the board. I don't care how bad you are. Your team. I don't care how bad the opponent is. Your team is good if they shut out an opponent. Period. Because most opponents are going to put points on the board. They're going to at least put 7 points on the board. Washington. Can you imagine shutting a team like Oregon down to 14 points or less? My God, that defense is going to be the second coming. Whatever defense does that, people are going to be all over it. Well, the next best thing happened last night in Death Valley. You had Clemson. Now, I, like many people, believe that the game wasn't necessarily going to fall on Jameis Winston. I trust Jameis Winston. This kid has, I mean, you're talking about a kid whose poise is incredible. This kid plays like a pro. He doesn't get nervous. He doesn't rush things. He just sits in the pocket and does what he's supposed to do. This is why you suddenly heard when they were recruiting him, this kid is on fire. Everyone wants this kid. Well, everyone except for Texas, evidently. I had no problems trusting Jameis Winston. What I did concern myself with is Florida State's defense. I said, here's the deal. This game is going to come down to FSU's defense. Florida State's offense is going to score. We know that. Clemson's if Clemson had any real weakness so far this year, it was on the defensive side. They gave up 35 to Georgia. They get even though they did hold you know South Carolina State. They held North Carolina State to 14 and 13 points. Wake Forest, was lucky to get 7 points on them. Syracuse put up 14. Boston College put up 14. But Florida State was more of a Georgia than it was a Wake Forest. So you knew Florida State was going to get some points on the board. That's neither here nor there. But at the same time, you knew that Clemson was going to get their points. You knew Clemson was going to put points on the board. They beat Georgia because they scored 38 points. Wake Forest, they put up 56 points. Against Boston College, they only put up 24, but, for whatever reason, Boston College is quite possibly the best bad team in the ACC. I mean, it's incredible. Look what they did with Florida State. They made Florida State look like, yeah, here it is, same old Florida State. They're gonna walk into face a team like Boston College, 3-3 Boston College, or at the time, you know, uh, a two and one Boston College. They just friggin' USC just put 35 points on them. Florida State ended up putting 48, but they gave up 34. So the question last night was Florida State's defense good enough to hold one of the better offenses in college football to a point to where the offense can get over? You sat there and thought to yourself, well, the magic number for Florida State's for their defense is probably 24. I think 24 was a fair number because I think Florida State's offense could have scored. You thought to yourself, oh, they can put up at least 24 points. The question is, could they hold Clemson to 24 points? Well, I think we got the answer last night. I mean, what the hell happened? They walked into Death Valley, and look, the final score is 51-14. But let's be honest, the final score was 51-7. That was a garbage touchdown at the end. Yeah, okay, fine. Let's give it 51-14. That's still crazy. That's still nuts. Taj Boyd did not know what to do. Sammy Watkins he wasn't even in the game. He was on the field. He caught a few passes. It was like watching Reggie Bush versus Texas in the national championship. The guy wasn't even involved in the game. They took him completely out. You're telling me that Florida State can completely stifle a Clemson team in Death Valley, one of the toughest crowds to play in front of. Listen to the commentators last night. They're saying this was just as tough as any crowd they've ever witnessed anywhere. These guys that have broadcasted rivalry games from the Horseshoe, rivalry games in Tennessee, the Swamp, the Doak, the Coliseum. And they were saying last night's crowd was as tough as any crowd they've ever seen, they've ever heard. You saw it a couple of times. The crowd noise got to Jameis a few times. There was a few mistakes because the crowd was into it. But the defense didn't make mistakes. The defense was all over them. The defense completely stifled them. But yet, Oregon deserves to be ranked number two. It's amazing to me that every year Oregon never has to prove they deserve to be a top caliber team. USC never has to prove they deserve to be a top caliber team. They are automatically assumed to be a top caliber team before they ever play a game. Even though every year they're guaranteed to lose that one game, they're always going to lose that one game. It's going to take them out of the chance for the national championship. But that doesn't matter to the pollsters. Oregon's just a tough team. Well, guess what? You're looking at this last night. The AP poll has Oregon ranked above Florida State. I guess Oregon's win over Washington was far more impressive than Florida State's win over Clemson last night. Because outside of that, their schedules are pretty even. You look at their schedules; they're both of them have their patsies. They Bethune Cookman. That's Florida State. Florida State has Bethune Cookman on their schedule. Let's be honest; they have Bethune Cookman's number. Oregon has Nicholls State. They have Virginia. They have Tennessee. Those are their non-conference. Florida, Nevada, Pittsburgh. Well, Pittsburgh's now in their conference, but they have Nevada. And they hammer Nevada. They got Idaho towards the end of the year. That's kind of patsy-ish, but they got to go into the swamp and play Florida. Now, yeah, certain years that means something, but this year, I mean, if Florida State can't beat Florida this year, then yeah, they don't deserve a shot at the national championship. They don't deserve a shot in the top five. Miami's playing some tough football. A lot of people are looking at Miami saying this could happen. Yeah, well, guess what? It's in Miami. Or, I'm sorry, it's at Florida State. So Florida State should have the advantage. Maybe. You know, Miami's 6-0. They beat Florida. They're one of the teams that beat up Florida. They didn't beat them up 21-16. They beat them. Other wins: Florida Atlantic, Savannah, South Florida. They outscored Georgia. They outlasted Georgia Tech. They outlasted North Carolina. Next up for Miami is Wake Forest. What are they going to do against Wake Forest? They're probably going to beat Wake Forest too. Nobody's looking at Wake Forest as a team that can shake things up. Next up for Florida State, North Carolina State. Got a feeling though this is going to be a different game. I look for Florida State to come out angry, just like they did last night. They're going to come out hostile. They need to make a point. It wasn't like last year. Last year they needed to make a point that they could beat Clemson. They did so. Boom, it was done. This year it's not necessarily whether they can beat Clemson or not. This year it's about whether or not they can freaking beat Clemson and then go on and win out. I look for Florida State to go in there against North Carolina State and hang an ugly number on them. I look for North Carolina State to take a walloping. Then they got Miami. Well, I look for Florida State to beat Miami in that game. I think Miami's going to give them a much tougher game than Clemson, but I still think they're going to win convincingly. Then they travel to Wake Forest. Well, they should beat Wake Forest, but that's the game that right there I think could be their trap game. That could be the stutter game. Maybe even Syracuse after that. They can't take either of those two teams lightly. Idaho, I think Idaho, they're going to want to send a message. They're going to want to send a message because the week after they go into Florida. So they're going to send a message to Idaho. But what we're seeing right now in the before the BCS comes out, what we're seeing with the AP is trust. Right now, the pollsters trust Oregon more than they trust Florida State. If Florida State beats Miami in 2 weeks, or on the second, if after that they're still undefeated, Oregon will have played UCLA. If Oregon beats UCLA and Florida State beats Miami, do you still put Oregon above Florida State? That's my question. I don't know if you can. I think at that point it comes time. Well, listen, Florida State they're making it happen. We got to make Oregon earn their way into the national championship. I still think Oregon's going to lose that one game they lose every year. You could guarantee it's going to happen. If it doesn't, well, hey, I'm going to go out and say there's a 90% chance Oregon loses one game this year that they shouldn't. 90% chance. If you'd asked me 24 hours ago, I'd have said 95% chance Florida State will lose that one game. You ask me now, I give it 40%. Defense is too good. Defense wins championships. I don't care how good your quarterback is. I don't care how many studs you have at receiver. If you can't score, you can't win. When you got a defense that hangs, that allows Clemson to score no more than 14 points at home, you can't help but say that's a defense that's going to win a lot of games for this team. Right now, Jeremy Pruitt, he's the hottest name in coaching right now. After last night, it was on a national stage. Everybody's looking at Jeremy Pruitt. You kind of wonder, is he going to be with Florida State next year? Another Nick Saban disciple. He had Dabo's number last night. This was Dabo Swinney after the game.
Okay, obviously, just very disappointed in how we played. Give Florida State just all the credit. I mean, they really played a heck of a ball game, took advantage of our mistakes. You know, going into a game like this, you don't have a big margin for error when you got two good teams battling it out, and we just really just making a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes, and it was just very disappointing. From the first play kind of set the tempo, and got a right on schedule, good first down call, and put the ball on the ground, and you just can't spot teams like that, points, and got a busted play for a touchdown, and at 14 points on the board, and our defense really hadn't played a whole lot. So again, just really poor job trying to get the momentum. We never were able to get momentum from the opening play.
Well, that pretty much sums it up. He's right. The momentum immediately went Florida State's way. I think it was from the coin toss. I think that in a game like that, I think it's important to be the first to get the ball in the second half. That usually, if you're leading at halftime, well, it gives you a chance to build on it. If you're losing, well, you can cut the lead. You kind of want the ball in the second half in a game that you expect to be close. Florida State kicks it off. What does Clemson do? They turn it over. LaMarcus Joyner already making his presence known. Right then and there, Florida State set a precedent. And then Jameis Winston's first pass, touchdown. They made it look easy. It looked like it was. I'm guaranteeing you, Florida State's scrimmage team, their scout team, was actually putting up more competition than Clemson did last night. Absolutely horrific display by Clemson. This uncharacteristic performance given by Clemson last night. You could hear in Dabo's voice. I mean, there's a guy that's. How often do you hear Dabo Swinney that defeated? He's beat up. He was embarrassed. He was humiliated. Look, losing to Florida State, there's no shame in losing to Florida State, even if whether you're in Tallahassee or Death Valley, it doesn't matter. There is no shame in losing to a good Florida State team, just like there's no shame in losing to Clemson. Florida State would have lost to Clemson last night. As long as they kept it close, there was no shame in it. Yeah, they're going to drop in the polls. Their shot at a national championship, quite possibly an ACC championship, was done. But there's no shame in it. It was a good team. There's shame in losing to the Appalachian States. There's shame in losing to James Madison. I'm sorry, but, if you schedule Nicholls State and you lose to them, there's a whole lot of shame there. Just ask Virginia Tech. Just ask Michigan. Michigan put Appalachian State thinking, on their schedule, thinking they were going to just, trounce on them to inspire them for the rest of the season. How did that work out, Michigan? What? Not too good? Yeah. Not too good. There's a lot of shame in losing to a crappy team like that. If you're an FBS team, put FBS teams on your schedule. If you want to play FCS teams, join the FCS. It's humiliating. But there's no shame in losing to Florida State. Now, there is humility. there is a sense of humiliation, getting whacked just like Clemson did last night. Yeah, there's a lot of humiliation there. Clemson, do you think Clemson walked into that game last night thinking, they were going to just get handed, they're going to get their hindquarters handed to them by Florida State? No. They went in there thinking that they were going to take it to FSU. FSU didn't prove anything to them. FSU wasn't that tough. Jameis Winston wasn't all that. Sure, he made a couple good passes. Yeah. He has great QB ratings against Pittsburgh. Boy, his QB rating against Bethune-Cookman, that was impressive. We ain't Bethune-Cookman. We're effing Clemson. And this is our house. You think for a second you're going to come into our house and push us around? That's exactly what Florida State did. They walked right in there. they they beat up Clemson, walked into the kitchen, baked some cookies, went looking through their DVD collection, found some porn, put it on, and enjoyed it. It was a horrible display by Clemson. Possibly, and here's something to think about. It's probably very possible that beating Clemson as badly as they did hurt them. Is it possible maybe that if they would beat Clemson, let's just say 51-40, or let's just say 35-22, 35-24, 35-23, whatever. If it would have been a much closer game where Clemson showed some life, or let's just say this, let's say hey they beat Clemson 51-49. Is Florida State ranked number 2 today? Because hey, you know what? If they can beat Clemson, if they can walk into Death Valley and give up 49 points and still win the game, it's possible they could do that to Oregon. I mean, that's something to think about. Did beating Clemson as badly as they did hurt Florida State? Something to think about. I mean, I still think that no, it wouldn't matter. As long as Oregon won that game last night, they were going to be ranked number 2. The only reason I'm ranked number 2 is because they can't rank number 1 and get away with it. I mean, think about it. Florida State may have literally hurt their chances by beating Clemson as bad as they did, because what people are saying is they learned less about Florida State last night than they did about Clemson. Clemson was overrated. Clemson didn't deserve to be on the national stage. This loss last night to Florida State may be worse than Oklahoma's loss to Boise State. Boise State made Oklahoma a laughingstock. When Oklahoma lost to Boise State, they lost to the Statue of Liberty play. Suddenly, people fell in love with Boise State, but they learned more about Oklahoma. Bob Stoops, good coach, but he's guaranteed he's gonna foul up somewhere. Clemson may have had their Boise State game last night. They lost so bad. It's going to be a while before they get the trust back of the pollsters. They can win every one of their games by 60 points the rest of the season. But all people are going to say is, well, you let Florida State walk into your house and put up 51 and you barely scored 14. And 7 of those points were your second string late in the game. I mean, think about it. That game was 51-14 and the score was closer than the game actually was. That's how bad that was. I hate to say it. I think I'm starting to like Jimbo Fisher. I thought he was a great pickup for Florida State. I mean, I'm a diehard Florida State fan. I've been a diehard Florida State fan since I was a kid. But I love Bobby Bowden. How do you not love Bobby Bowden? But it got to the point to where it was obvious, the minute he made his son Jeff the offensive coordinator and stuck with him, you knew it was time for Bobby to go. I love Bobby, but I love Florida State more. Jimbo. I honestly believe Jimbo had the team in the right direction, especially after 2 recruiting classes ago. He was like, all right, Jimbo's in charge. Then came North Carolina State last year, and you're like, well, Florida State's obviously ready for the big time. Jimbo wasn't. He had the horses, he had the team. He just didn't have the guts. Well, last night he had the guts. This is his first big test. Jimbo's back. I mean, his play calling was perfect last night. Right off the bat. I mean, he had them motivated. He had them ready to go into Clemson and take the game from him. From the first turnover, it was over. It was over at the first turnover. Jimbo was asked, did the first turnover set the tone of the game? Here's what he said.
Well, it does, because especially when you're on the road, you get confidence. Your young guys get confidence. You know, the crowd, you don't take them out, but you can make it manageable in what you're doing. And it was very critical, and our guys feed off each other. And we talked about sudden momentum changes, being able to handle momentum when you're on the road, being able to stop it if it goes one way, or once you get it, you got to try to ride it. And we were able to get that momentum and kept riding it.
Gotta love that answer. Straight out of Bobby Bowden's book. He sounded like Bobby Bowden, didn't he? Sounded just like Bowden. Dan Gummit. Yeah, you got to ride that momentum, Dan Gummit. Heck, when you play in a place like that, you got to come out and get the momentum, Dan Gummit. Sounds just like Bobby Bowden. I think Jimbo's going to be around a while. You know, he's going to have a couple of losing seasons, but he's going to be around like Bobby Bowden was. I think people are going to, if this year he has a really solid year, maybe gets to the national championship, people are going to like him. They're not going to want to see him go. I mean, he's got the same appeal and the same personality as Bobby Bowden. You know, I mean, he kind of even looks like Bobby Bowden. You know, you put a thicker head of hair on the poor guy. I'm not trying to make fun of him because he's bald, but, you know, you put hair on him and the guy looks like a young Bobby Bowden. He does. You know, he's a very likable guy. He knows the right things to say. You know, it's like Dabo. You watched Dabo last night in the press conference. You know, he knew the right thing to do. He knew to take, you know, everybody wanted to go after Taj Boyd last night. He had a horrible game. He chose the wrong time to have one of the worst games of his career. What does Dabo do? He says, hey, don't worry about Taj. Taj is fine. I'll take Dabo over anybody. You know that wasn't true. He'd take Jameis Winston. Anybody in their right mind right now would take Jameis Winston. It's like, Dabo, did you see Jameis Winston tonight? Were you watching him? You know that he'd take Jameis, but he's going to say it. Yeah, Taj Boyd's my quarterback. I'm going to take Taj Boyd. That was the right thing to do. He said, don't. He goes, it was our failure. Tonight was our failure. It was the coach's failure. And it starts at the top. It starts with me. I'm the reason we got hammered tonight. That was the right thing to say, Dabo. And Jimbo handled it perfectly on his side. I mean, he's just like Bobby Bowden. He's very, he's very diplomatic. He knows the right things to say. You know, he had to make sure that everyone also knew, hey, don't be surprised by the score. Don't be swayed by the score. This is a damn good Clemson team. It's pro wrestling logic 101. You don't go in front of a mic and tell everyone your opponent sucks. Your opponent's a loser, because you defeat yourself. You know, you kill yourself right there, because basically if you win, so what? You said the guy was a loser. You said so yourself. If you lose, whoa, how bad are you? You just got beat by a loser. It's the same psychology. You know, Clemson's a great team. Don't let this score fool you. They're a phenomenal team. They're still one of the best. That's exactly what you do. It's diplomatic, and it makes, you know, it appeals to people that want to say, well, maybe Clemson's not that great of a team, so Florida State shouldn't get a lot of credit. You know, leave it to the pollsters. Leave it to everybody to make it seem like Florida State should be thankful they're number 3. I mean, trust me. Do you think, I guarantee there was a lot of pollsters out there that it killed them to not put Ohio State number 3. Ohio State's another one of those teams, another USC. It's another Oregon. They're going to rank them high no matter what, without proving anything. They're going to look at the schedule and say, look, you know, we're going to rank them high because they're a good team and they have a weak schedule and their schedule's not going to get in their way. So we're going to rank them number 1. Every year they do that. You know, look at USC. What was it, 5 years ago, when, you know, they lost all their playmakers on defense, half their offensive line, and they were starting a true freshman at quarterback in Matt Barkley. They were ranked like 2 or 3 in the preseason. Tell me any other team that gets that kind of respect outside the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. You know, Florida had to deal with that. They wouldn't even get a sniff at the top 10. Florida State wouldn't. I don't think Bama would. LSU wouldn't. Texas wouldn't. But let USC get in there with a true freshman starting at quarterback. You know, but patchwork offensive line, no playmakers on defense. Yeah, we'll rank them number 2. We'll rank them number 3. Who cares? It's just the preseason rankings. Yeah, it's just the preseason rankings. Let's forget the fact that if they rank you high to begin with, that gives you some leniency. You can lose a game, maybe even 2, and still end the season ranked in the top 5. Yeah, don't be fooled. Your preseason rankings mean everything right now, and it's going to mean everything next year too. Jimbo Fisher knows that. He learned a lot last year. Jimbo learned how to blow it all. He learned how to have the keys to a kingdom and just toss them in the fountain. Because that's exactly what he did last year. That loss to, that performance against South Florida, that was bad. The loss to North Carolina State, that was just epically tragic. So at that point, yeah, they were struggling with winning the ACC, which was still a very weak division. By the time they played Florida, they weren't Florida, but they were decent. But they should have gotten beat by Florida like they did. They should have won that game. They had the talent. Everybody had given up from the top down. Jimbo had given up. The team had given up. They didn't care about that game. I mean, it was so bad that when they went into the bowl game against Northern Illinois, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, "Hey, I don't have Florida State as a favorite right now. I mean, I have it even. Depends which Florida State team shows up. Florida State should have walked all over that team. They just didn't care last year. But the good news is that got them set for this year. It's a different Florida State team. Jeremy Pruitt might be the difference this year. The guy is just, he's a psycho. He's a brilliant defensive guy. Granted, the guy's got the horses, but you can have the horses doesn't necessarily mean you're going to, you're going to provide the proper calls. You're going to provide the proper formations. You're going to match up well against, the opposition. Jeremy Pruitt, like Jimbo Fisher, they learned under the best. They learned under Nick Saban. Yeah, Urban Meyer's great. Yeah, he is great. I like Urban Meyer. The guy's a terrific coach. He's not Nick Saban. Win a few more national championships, It'll be Nick Saban. Brian Kelly, before it's all said and done, might be closer to Nick Saban than Urban Meyer is. If you think about it, Brian Kelly, what he's doing over at Notre Dame is pretty terrific. The guy's a good coach. Nick Saban's the man. And people that play under Nick Saban, coaches that learn under Nick Saban, are successful wherever they go. He's also a great teacher. So until next week, I think I'm going to be pretty upset about the BCS when it comes out. But you know what? It is what it is. Florida State has the opportunity to be in the top 2 towards the end of the year. I think if they win out, they're ranked number 2, even if Oregon wins out. But we'll see what happens. Until next week, this is Sports Bing. I'm out.